Hi, it's Mark. A few days ago, I celebrated an anniversary. That anniversary is the one I celebrate every year on December 7th, and it's far more important to me than Christmas Day, Father's Day, and my real birthday. It's a day of rebirth, celebration, reflection, sadness, and joy. I celebrate it every year. And recently I've had some comments to me, as I get every year: congratulations, great job. And people who comment that I've somehow done something important for 35 years. Because it was 35 years on the 7th of December from the date that I quit drinking. I'm an alcoholic. I've been sober for 35 years. And I usually take the 7th as a day off. Doesn't always work out that way, because if it falls during the week, taking a day away from calls and appointments and so on is difficult to do. So I prefer when it's on a weekend and I can actually take a day of quiet and silence and separation from the day-to-day hubbub of work and just spend some time reflecting. The other reason I'm recording this is the feedback I've got from some people, not just this year, but other years, but it seems to grow every year as opposed to diminish. And I think it mostly comes from people who don't really understand alcoholism, and they don't understand sobriety. The alcoholism is a thing, and it happened to me, happened in my life. And there are many people who say this is environmental. It's because of our lifestyle, influences in our family, more so when you're an adult child of an alcoholic, which I am. My dad was an alcoholic. He got sober when I was 5 years old. I don't know if he changed a lot of things about his life when he got sober, but he got sober. And that's to be championed. And he died at 91. So he was, I think, 55 or 56 years sober when he died. So I want to tell this tale in a fulsome way and talk about drinking and alcoholism and coming to the realization that you are an alcoholic. Then the dealing with that and getting sober, which for me was a year of sheer horror. Then there's the getting sober, and then the questioning and self-doubt for days, then weeks. And those first few months were, okay, have I really quit? Am I really sober now? Do I really have sufficient resolve and commitment and ability to stay sober? And that was it. That's when the hard work was done. From that day to 35 years later, how much hard work was there to stay sober? Very, very little, which is not to say that there haven't been moments of frustration in my life where I've maybe been at risk of taking a drink. And there have been some occasions where I almost accidentally served a drink or had a drink because one was served to me that I thought was a non-alcoholic drink, and it wasn't. Those moments have happened. So I want to reflect on a very large chunk of my life to make 2 or 3 important points. So first of all, talking about my drinking. I didn't have a drink till I was 17 years old. I was underage at the time. Drinking age in Alberta was 21 at that time. And I had this feeling about alcohol because my dad was an alcoholic. My dad got sober When I was 5 years old, he got AA and became a regular weekly attendee at AA meetings. My mother went to Al-Anon meetings, and very often they would go to conventions and events where they would drag their son along because they had nowhere to leave him. So I got to, as an adolescent and as a teenager, very often to be at events where I was hearing speakers tell their stories. And if you've ever been to an AA meeting, sometimes those stories are very graphic. They're like the confessional, but to an audience, where someone is confessing their deeds during their drinking escapades. And some of them are dramatic, some of them are horrible, some involve a great deal of horror for the person and their family over many years. That wasn't the case for my dad. His heavy drinking was about a 3-year period, culminating in him realizing he needed help. He then visited the church minister, who referred him to an AA group that met at that church once a week, and he became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was very proud of that change in his life. He spent a lot of time during years I remember as an adolescent and teenager where he was helping other people get sober, stay sober, come back from having slipped back into drinking. So my knowledge base of what alcoholism is, whether you're in the camp to believe it's a disease, believe it's an addiction, it's a circumstance, and everybody can be divided about which way you come about it. But the reality is, when you're an alcoholic, you're an alcoholic. Booze is in control of your life, and your life cannot be orderly until you deal with that. And failure to deal with it is some form of lingering, and sometimes not so lingering, death sentence, because what's the alternative to dealing with alcoholism? If you don't quit, sooner or later it's going to kill you. And it's going to do a lot of damage to a lot of other people in the process. My dad got sober when I was 5 years old. At 17, I had this knowledge base of what drinking and alcohol and alcoholism was all about. But I was at a party with friends. A friend of mine, I was helping to get elected to student council, to student council president. And there was a poster making party at his house, and there were pizzas, and I think there was a case of beer. I think 12 bottles of beer, and I think there were 10 kids there, so you couldn't have seconds. I had my first beer. It was Lethbridge Pilsner. And I enjoyed the having of it. I didn't particularly enjoy the taste of it because it was new to me, it was foreign to me. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't like, wow, I've got to have more of this. And I think it was another year or two before I had another drink. And in those early days, beer being the cheap beverage and easy to acquire when you're underage, I was a beer drinker at first. And I was a sporadic drinker because when you're young and poor, you don't have much money from a part-time job and then early days working for low wages, you don't have a lot of spare income. So my drinking was not driven so much by my appetite for drinking as it was for my budget for drinking, which was pretty paltry. But I didn't drink very much. So my late teens, early 20s, you would say I was a social drinker. And in my early 20s, getting married at 20, I didn't drink very much. We'd go for dinner on a special occasion. I'd have a drink. We'd have some wine, or holiday season or special occasions with company. We'd have some alcohol in the house. Otherwise, we didn't. And then I got into a job where lunches with people for business was the thing you did. You went for lunch, and it was usually at a restaurant or lounge where there were other colleagues gathering and drinking ensued. Not a lot, because you had to go back to the office and work. But there were, in that work environment, there were more opportunities, there were more parties and social events in the evenings and on weekends where I partook happily, not excessively, but I was drinking more. I was drinking more often, but I was what you would call a social drinker. I was more social. I got involved in a number of things in my late 20s, early 30s, where I was in party mode, if you will. Not so much hanging out in lounges or bars, but large gatherings and parties and events where people were drinking. So you have those poor quality, watered down drinks at a cash bar, and you have a few drinks. I probably had more drinks. I probably drove when I shouldn't have. But by and large, it was accelerated social drinking. It wasn't binge drinking, and it wasn't getting drunk. I then started my own business in my late 20s. I think it was 29 time. And then there were more social occasions. There were more opportunities to go out for the liquid lunch. Well, it would be a sandwich and 2 drinks, or it would be a full meal and a longer lunch and maybe 3 drinks. And this continued and continued and continued. And somewhere in that time frame, my early 30s, ups and downs in business, and a business failure along the way, and restarting, not fun. A marriage that had not been fun for a long time. And emotionally, it's hard to look back in the rearview mirror and say, well, was the marriage affected by the drinking? Was the drinking affected by the marriage? Was all of it affected by a failing business that needed to be restarted and financial troubles? Oh yes, I had them all. And I don't have a scalpel to dissect one from the other and say, well, this was the more important, or this was less important, more significant. And I don't have the scientific background to determine, am I an addict? Was I addicted? Or was it inherited somehow? Is there a genetic predisposition? Because my dad was an alcoholic. But in his very large family of 11 siblings that he had, some of them drank, some of them didn't. But I don't recall any that had an issue with alcohol, or any of my cousins that, booze was a big problem. So to hang my hat on that hook and say, well, it's hereditary. My dad is an alcoholic, therefore I'm an alcoholic, it is maybe a weak argument, as much as I do believe that there is a predisposition. And I've read some of the literature on that. But it was more, this was going on in my life. And during this time, things going on in my life around booze, my behavior around everything was slipping. Was I being a good parent to my young daughters? I don't think so. I thought so at the time, because I was a dad who, paid for things, took them places, took them on vacations, took them to their ringette games or soccer games, and went to school concerts and band concerts and so on. I was active, I was involved. Was I as attentive as I could have been? Of course not. Of course I wasn't. Now, was that because I was distracted running a business and struggling? Was I distracted because I wasn't in a happy marriage, and therefore I wasn't giving my wife and my children the attention they deserved? Oh yes, all of the above. But still, I walked around like a normal person. People who knew me later said they didn't know I was an alcoholic. They didn't know I had a problem, but I did. And during that period of time, I felt worse and worse about myself. And I drank more and more quietly. I would drink at home and drink too much and drink too often and drink every day. So then the background, the experience of being a child of an alcoholic and exposed to what Alcoholics Anonymous is all about, what getting sober was all about, and the perils of not doing that. I knew that. I was not only an alcoholic, I was a smart alcoholic. I knew what was going on. I knew I wasn't happy. I knew I had to get control of this. So for a period of a year leading up to when I quit drinking, there were lots of things going on. Lots of turmoil in my head, in my belly, in my business, I'd like to say going on in my family, but the truth was there wasn't a lot going on in my family. My wife spent far more time with my kids than I did. And we stopped doing things as much as a family, though we took some wonderful vacations together. Otherwise, it was dad went off to work, mom went off to work too, and we worked in the same business. But it was different. If I had it all to do over again, with or without the alcoholism in my life, I would have been a different brand of husband, I think. I think I would have been a different brand of father. But I'd still be me. And I think that's to be recognized for all people who face these kinds of things. At the root of it all, before you had a problem, there was who you were. Who were you? What kind of person were you? What kind of family did you come from? What kind of life did you lead? And if it wasn't for the booze, you'd be that person. But the booze makes you a different person. The booze makes you into someone who does things poorly, recklessly, dangerously. And I've heard people referred to as high-functioning alcoholics. And I think I fit that definition because I look back on those last few years of substantial amount of drinking, and in particular, that last year of hell, that last horrible year, I did some great things. I accomplished a lot of things in my work, in my business, and taking a business failure and putting it behind me and starting over and rebuilding again, which was very difficult. And I did it. Not so much with bravado, but without seeing it as a huge obstacle, without seeing it as something I couldn't do. I just did it. I treated some people badly, some of whom I've atoned to, some of whom I've made amends to. But I also knew I had a problem. I really knew I had a problem. So long before the making amends, there were, not being a good person and not being anyone I could be proud of for about a year. And during that period of time, I would wrestle with the issue of, was I an alcoholic or not? Am I not? I'll prove it to myself. I'll go a day without drinking. Well, that didn't work. So then I would organize my day. Okay, this would be a day that I wouldn't go out for lunch. I would go to the deli and pick up a sandwich. I would organize my full day at the office through to going home time without alcohol. I would be sure of it. Absolutely guaranteed there would be no booze in my body that day. And then I'd be driving home, and it wasn't far from the office to home, probably 2 miles. And I was white knuckling it. I was gripping that wheel. I was determined. I was focused. I wasn't thinking about anything else but staying sober. I was going home and I wasn't going to have a drink. And I would drive home, hit the button, open the garage door, and drive my car in and park it in the garage. And from the time I turned off the ignition until I walked through the laundry room into the house, I did the rationalization. And besides the things you may have heard about alcoholics being really good excuse makers, really good liars, we have all those skills. We practice them. badly, but we do. But I had this rationalization, this convinced myself, there, I did it. I went all day. I didn't have a drink. I'm sober. Therefore, I'm not an alcoholic. That was the thought process going through my mind in the 30 to 45 seconds it would take to get out of the car and come into the house. I would hang up my coat. And you can guess what I would do next. I would pour a drink. There, no, I didn't drink today, but then I'd have a drink before dinner. I'd have a drink with dinner. I'd have a drink after dinner. And somewhere between after dinner and midnight, I'd probably have a pitcher full of orange juice and vodka and a glass sitting beside the tub while I'd be soaking in the tub doing some reading, or I'd be watching television and drinking. One way or another, the alcoholic finds a way to casually drink and drink more. I wasn't a noisy drunk. I wasn't a violent drunk. I wasn't running off doing crazy things in a car. I never broke anything. I just got quietly stewed every night. And over time, of course, you're doing this all the time, the tolerance level you have for booze rises. So 1 or 2 drinks don't get you much of a buzz. 3 drinks, okay, we're talking now. And more than that, you get really buzzed, and the body and the liver and the brain, they react accordingly. So it's not a good time for your health, but mostly it's not a good time for your life. During this period of time, you know, the problems being worked through with business, with work, with my wife leaving our business that really couldn't afford us all anymore, getting work with a former employee of hers who wanted her back. So that worked out really well, because otherwise we would have, you know, been at risk of failing in our business again and having a marriage dissolution as well. So during this period of time, I felt pretty lousy about myself, and it's pretty easy to feel sorry for yourself when you're an alcoholic and you can't think a good thought about yourself, and you know these things, you know them in your own head. No one else knows them. In my case, nobody knew. I had a wife who was an accelerated social drinker as well. I had a dad. My dad had come to work for me. And here's my dad who'd been sober all those years, an alcoholic himself. That year at Christmas, even though I quit drinking on the 7th of December, at Christmas, he gave me a gift box of a couple bottles of wine. He knew me as a social drinker. He didn't know me as an alcoholic. And we worked together every day. So that sounds a little bizarre, but it was. I was looking for a solution, an excuse. And I went through a long period of time where I wanted to quit, wanted to get sober. It was a scary time. As I said, I'd had a failed business. I had debts to pay. I had financial problems up the yin-yang. And life was not happy. Could we continue to afford the big house and the fancy car and all those things that went with all of the lifestyle? And the answer was no, of course not. Those things can't be sustained. And even more so when somebody's falling apart as an alcoholic. I was. And I was insecure. I knew about AA. And I know that whether it's counseling or AA, there's lots of resources to avail yourself out there to get help. I sought none because I was smarter than this. I was going to figure this out. I really was. Partly it was that daily white knuckling. I'm not going to drink today because I thought if I could put together a day and then 2 days of being sober, I could prove to myself that I could keep drinking and wasn't an alcoholic. because that would solve one problem. I could keep drinking, to keep the breweries and the distilleries happy. The booze industry would like me. But I couldn't make it through that. I couldn't navigate it through that. And the more I felt that way, the more down I got on myself and on my situation. I contemplated suicide. I didn't take any steps. I didn't write a note, and I didn't talk to anybody about it or do those telltale things that people do when they're asking for help, like attempting. No, I didn't do any of that. I thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be certain. There's going to be no attempting about it. Therefore, no need to discuss it with somebody. And yes, I was in that horrible place where that's how you see the world. And I did. I was figuring I was going to use my wife's car. Because of the two cars we had, hers was the crappy old one and mine was the better new one. And if you're going to crash a car, might as well crash the crappy old one. It was a Chevy Citation, and it was not a great car, and it had some hail damage. So it wouldn't have been a horror for the world if that car bit the dust. And I was going to bite the dust. I was going to drive my car into a concrete abutment at high speed. That was my suicide method. I had it planned. That's what I would do. I wasn't sure when I was going to do it, but I was pretty sure I was going to do it soon. And I hadn't picked out the location, but I thought that won't take long. I can go for a drive one day and find a few potential sites where I can be sure that the deed will work. And I just got deeper into it. And I admit there were a few nights where it wasn't just the regular amount of drinking, it was a lot more drinking. And I was feeling physically ill. And the white knuckling was sort of like, screw it, I'm not going to beat this. I am an alcoholic. I can't quit. My alternative, well, you see, the reason that alternative of suicide came to mind was that will solve a bunch of problems. Like a lot of people in small businesses with lots of debt, you take on lots of life insurance. And if you die from any cause, it pays out. It would pay the debts, pay off the mortgage on the house, it would pay off the debts of the business, and provide a substantial amount of cash to the business, who's the beneficiary of the insurance policies, and the business would then be owned by my wife, who was the only other shareholder, and she would carry on with the business or not, but she would have money, and she'd be provided for, and my kids would be provided for. And yeah, that's pretty sick math, isn't it? That's a pretty silly way to look at things, but it was how I was looking at it. I was convinced that that was the best solution. Nobody'd have Mark Kolke to kick around anymore. There would be no problems with the bill collectors and the debts and the lawyers and the bankers. They would be out of the picture. Done, paid, gone, over. My wife wouldn't have an alcoholic husband. My kids wouldn't have an alcoholic father. And that's where my head was at. And I don't remember whether my head was in that space for 3 days or 5 days or 2 weeks. That part's a blur, because I was drinking more and more as I hesitate to say thought my way through. I thought I was thinking my way through it. I wasn't. I was irrational, like I've never been irrational in my life. I've been irrational from time to time, but this was off the charts irrational. And I was starting to figure out, okay, I'm going to do this soon. This is the only way. I tried to quit. I've tried to quit. I can't. I reached out to a few people to talk to, but inevitably you start talking with the intent that you're going to pour out everything, and then you don't. You you have a conversation with them and it goes off in a different direction. Or you try to talk about something and they're not tuned into you. They're busy with their own stuff, their own life. So the people that might have been able to help weren't getting signals from me that, help, I need help. I wasn't giving that message to anyone, so no one was receiving that message. And I wasn't going to AA, and I wasn't going to counseling. I wasn't going to any kind of the many programs that are out there to help people. And I wasn't talking to my wife. I wasn't talking to my dad. We talk about a user-friendly person to talk to. I didn't have the courage because I felt really ashamed of myself. I felt ashamed and I felt worthless. I felt my life had no value. And the best way was for me to check out and provide the best I could for the people I cared about. December 7th, I was sitting in the family room after dinner watching Jeopardy, which was one of my favorite TV shows of the day. And I still tune in now and again. It's for people who think they're pretty smart and they can answer questions. And I was so proud that Alex Trebek was the host of it. And it was a show with a lot of Canadian content. So I was happy about that. The Alex Trebek influence, no doubt. And I was all set to answer questions that night about December 7th, because of course, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor Day, the day that would live in infamy. I was thinking about that. I was thinking about where my thoughts had been in days leading up to that. Let me put the drink down. Because I had a drink on the go. This would be normal. My Bacardi Gold rum and Coke. And I put the glass down. It was half full. And I never went back to it. So I thought, you know what? A day that will live in infamy. Well, if I quit today, I'll certainly never forget the date. I'll always remember it's December 7th. I won't forget that. I don't want to die. I was saying to myself, I don't want to die. I don't want to abandon my kids. What would that be like for kids to know their dad committed suicide? I can't do that. I can't do that to them. And I must admit, I didn't have the same thought of what that would do to my wife, who would then say my husband committed suicide. I didn't think she was that happy with me either in those days. Truth be told, I wasn't thinking of her. But I was thinking of the kids. I was. So I can't identify and say, well, this was the specific reason that I put that glass down that night. Or maybe I was just ready. Maybe I'd had enough white knuckling drives home, enough drinking, enough thoughts of ending my own life. And maybe someone would analyze that and say, well, I wasn't really sincere in my plans to commit suicide. Maybe I wasn't. One way or the other, I wasn't ready to die because I wasn't ready to stop living. So I took the dog for a walk, a long walk. It was a cold night. And that dog had been going for a lot of late night long walks. Didn't really want to go for a walk that night, but I hooked her up to the leash and away we went. And I've not had a drink since. And a few things happened in the days that followed. You heard the long part of the story. The short part of the story now is that for that first few days and few weeks, I didn't tell anybody I'd quit drinking. For a number of reasons. Number one, if I told people I quit drinking, then I would have to say I'm an alcoholic. And I wasn't sure I was ready to say that out loud to anyone. But I was also concerned that people would notice. People would say, why aren't you drinking, Mark? Or, hey, Mark, have a drink. And I learned quickly that nobody noticed, nobody cared, and nobody asked. Did social things over the Christmas season that year, family Christmas. As I mentioned earlier, my dad got me wine for Christmas, which then caused me to say, well, I quit drinking. We did social things, dinner party with some friends and that kind of thing. And sure, there was lots of alcohol around it. I was serving guests. I just wasn't having any. I was having club soda. Nobody noticed, nobody asked. There was no need to confess to them or to the world, hey, I'm an alcoholic. I got sober on December 7th. But there were things going on for me that were powerful. 2 or 3 of them really dramatic. The first, I had dreams. I was having dreams at night that were so vivid. I would wake up, not in a sweat. These weren't nightmares. They were just vivid dreams. And I was thinking, when's the last time I had a vivid dream? And I couldn't remember. And if you read a bit about this, you find that the suppression of dream sleep is a very common thing with alcoholics. Alcohol does something to the part of the brain that is involved in our dreaming, and we don't have dream sleep. We don't sleep very well anyway because we're busy drinking, but the reality is I suddenly was having dreams, and I couldn't remember when I'd had the last one. I was starting to feel better physically. I didn't lose a bunch of weight right away, though weight loss, followed because I wasn't putting all of that alcohol and sugar and mix into my body every day. And that started to make a difference. So I was feeling better, generally speaking. But there was one other thing. Because once you clear away the alcoholic fog, you can see things more clearly. And I was seeing that I wasn't in a happy marriage. And I would never blame her or the marriage for the drinking. Never would. But I think the drinking, like it does with so many other things, you push things away as they're really not a problem, or they're really not an issue, because you're so focused on the things you are focused on, and the booze is in control. So having a debate in your head about cause and effect of anything, it just doesn't happen. And I recognized this almost right away. Wow, I'm in an unhappy marriage and I need to do something about that. So that added some complications, but again, doesn't make me unique. I mean, 99%, I don't know, I don't keep statistics, but we know a very large portion of people who are alcoholics that their marriages end in divorce. And whether the divorce ties into the alcoholism or the alcoholism contributes to the divorce, it's pretty widespread knowledge that happens. But here's a guy who got sober and realized he needed to leave the marriage. Wasn't a happy place. Had not been a happy place emotionally for a very long time. And looking back now, I recognize we were young. We were both adult children of alcoholics, and we were both perhaps accustomed to a similar brand of abnormal that comes with living in a dysfunctional family where alcohol or any other addiction is present. So the marriage ended. And you can imagine all of the business issues, the financial issues, the divorce issues, and issues with respect to kids unfolds. And there's a whole other story I could tell that I won't tell today about trying to make things right by my kids. It seemed to work out really well in the early years not shared custody, but lots of liberal access and lots of involvement that maybe wasn't good enough or long enough. And just because I got sober doesn't mean I didn't have the capacity to mess things up, which I certainly did in many ways with my daughters. But this is a talk about alcoholism, so I'll return to the point. I sobered up. I didn't solve any of my problems right away. None of my problems went away by sobering up. My message to anybody with a problem or someone with a problem in your life that you want to help get sober, sobering up does not solve problems. Sobering up gets you sober, period. Admitting you're an alcoholic, well, that's an important component of getting and staying sober, but that doesn't solve any problems. Not drinking, being sober is a lifestyle choice. It is a life choice. So you can have a lifestyle. And in my case, it was a choice to live, to be a dad to my kids, to be a straight up human being who faced his medicine, paid his bills, negotiated solutions to problems, and went about the process of divorcing a wife of 17 years and moving on with my life and remaining connected with my kids in theirs. So there you have it. That was the hell. The 35 years since then, I've had all kinds of ups and downs in my life and all kinds of problems to solve and deal with. And dealt some of them well and some of them very badly as a sober person. The staying sober hasn't been difficult. It really hasn't. And it saved me a lot of money. I'm always a good designated driver. And I'm happy. Am I happy with everything in my life? No, but I'm happy. I'm 35 years sober. So when people say congratulations on 35 years of sobriety, I say thank you, and I appreciate that. But the tough work that I did was a long time ago. A long time ago. And I haven't talked about this much beyond one-on-one conversations with people over those 35 years, including conversations with my dad in his later years. I've only once before talked about this in a public way. It was a speech that I did at Toastmasters in a competition. A number of years ago, I was told by others that, no, that speech won't win because it's too negative. And it was telling the story of how I got sober and telling the story of some friends I helped get sober and how to be mindful about depression and others. Anyway, I did that speech and I won at my club. They said, oh, you should change that. You won't go far. And I kept winning at different levels along the way. And that was done. It was recorded and it's no longer live on the internet, but it was. But that was sort of my public coming out about these issues in my life. And though I've written about it in my daily columns every year for many years, I haven't sort of screwed my courage to the sticking place, in the words of Macbeth. I haven't done this, and I needed to. I need to. And if only one person watches this and says, hey, I can get sober. If one person hears this and says, hey, I understand a bit about Mark that I didn't understand before. And certainly, I've got 2 adult children in their 40s. And I have a relationship with one of them and not with the other. And there are many causes of the quality of our relationships we have with our children, and they're imperfect. They don't do what we want them to do, and we don't do what they want them to do, and we don't talk openly enough about things that really matter until maybe it's too late. And maybe it is too late. But this is maybe in some fashion a confession to them of some things they didn't know. And there's more, of course. And if they wanted to know more, they can ask more. I'll tell more. But I think I've shared as much in this talk as I've ever shared with just about anyone. There are a few other details along the way that I've shared with other people, but for the most part, that's the whole story. And it's a story with a happy ending, in that here I am 35 years later with a pretty healthy liver and a healthy attitude. So what's the point of doing this talk? Maybe it's to help me. Maybe it's to purge some things. Maybe it's to be of value to my daughters if they find this interesting or if they want to watch it. Maybe it's helpful to someone else out there who says, hey, I got a problem. Maybe there's some kernel in what I've talked about that will make somebody pick up the phone and call me, or reach out to me or send me an email, or reach out to anyone else and say, hey, I got a problem, or I think I got a problem. I need to talk to somebody. I need to get some help. Because we're really good at throwing out platitudes. I mean, you got a problem? Give me a call. Anything I can do to help, let me know. Well, that's not going to work, is it? Because people with a problem want to deny they have a problem. Or even if they're prepared to admit they have a problem, that reaching out for help, saying, help me, please, it's very difficult. You think it's difficult to do sober, try doing it when you're drunk. Try doing it when drugs or alcohol or whatever your addiction is in control of you. Try asking for help. Well, it's almost impossible. So we have to reach out to others. We see somebody who has a problem. We know they have a problem. We suspect they have a problem. We need to take them in hand. We need to put our arm around their shoulder, and we need to help them open up. And if I help somebody to do that, maybe I'll save somebody's life or just save them a lot of trouble. Don't do what I did up to the point where I quit. And then once you quit, stay quit. Continue to be sober. The hard work is over when you're sober. Doesn't mean there aren't troubles ahead. I don't go to the liquor cabinet to solve a problem. Too often I go to the refrigerator and my vice becomes overeating. I've done my share of that. I have not purified my life. My life is not something that people should follow or say, well, I want to be like Mark. No, please don't be like me. Don't be like me. Ask for help if you can. If someone offers you help, accept the help. Try to accept that. If it's hard to recognize and acknowledge that you got a drinking problem, we'll try. You know, as alcoholics, we're really good at making excuses. We're really good at lying. We're really good at obscuring the truth, rationalizing anything. It's a skill set. Now, it sometimes helps us in other parts of our life, positively or negatively, but it is what it is. I'm sober. I'm happy to be sober. I've never done anything like this recording before, but I've done this, and I've done it in celebration of 35 years sober. And I've done it so that I might pass a message to others who might benefit from it, might improve their lives, or someone in their circle of friends and loved ones to deal with the problem. And if I can help you, reach out to me. I'll help if I can. And I bet I can. Thanks for listening. I'm Mark Kolke. Bye for now.